Good morning. What a blessing it is to be with you this morning. Just wanted to say what a blessing Christy and I received the other evening when we were able to stop by and visit the senior parade honoring the four Bentonville Church of Christ high school seniors that are graduating in 2020 this year. That's Wyatt Burns and Alex Hawk and Emma Mayan and Abby Sliker. It was really a pleasure to be able to sit and chat with them for a few moments in the car line as we were finding out more about their plans for the future. And we really were blessed by the ability to sit and chat with them, and just amazed at the great amount of foresight and where those young folks have their plans for the future already in place. So we're excited about what we heard and what we saw, and being able to connect with many of you who are in that line and waiting your turn to get face to face with our seniors this year. Also, just as an additional mention, I thought I might make sure that we're aware that we've got 9 college graduates this year as well. Emily Davis and Sarah Fontenelle, Cordell Hutchins, and Chase Hunter and Alex Jennings and Madeline Knight, Jacob Lakota, Kyle Watson, and Maggie Wood. All these seniors who graduated from their graduate or undergraduate work are moving on into their new either educational or professional areas of expertise. So just an amazing amount of growth happening this time of year, and it's just a blessing to have been a part of that. Also, the other night, we were able to see and connect with Daniel and Megan McGraw as they actually were able to bring their possessions up from the Houston area in a truck, and many of you helped unload that in a very quick time frame for them. And they began their house hunting. So we'll find out. Hopefully, they'll have landed on a house by the time they're done with this trip. But if not, we'll have faith that God's going to continue to bless them with the right home when the time is near. So want to just thank you for the encouragement I received from last week's class as we started off a 2-week conversation about James and the book of James, and really enjoyed getting an opportunity to present and talk with you all about that book. We're going to stay in James to start the day today, and then we're going to roll into another book that is tied very closely to the same subject matter that we're focusing on in James today. So if you will, go ahead and turn in James chapter 2 with me to verse 14. And if I had a title for today's class, the title would be, "What Good Is It?" is the name of the class. And you'll see very quickly what we're talking about based off of the conversation that James puts us through in James chapter 2, verse 14. "What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, 'Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." Wow, what a conversation that James starts off with. What good is it, right? What good is faith that doesn't produce actions? And that's the conversation that we go into today. And that's something that I thought really would connect with us during the time that we're struggling through, even in this period of time. One of the things that really stands out to me is really even in verse 18, where it says in the second half of that verse, "Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do." You believe that there is one God. Good, James says. You believe? Well, that's awesome. Even the demons believe that and shudder. I mean, can you imagine if we truly believed that God is with us, which we do? That's no more than what the demons do if we don't have faith. The demons believe, and they tremble. But that doesn't put them in a saved state, and their faith does them no good. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do. You believe that there is one God, good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. You foolish man, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our ancestor Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? That's a conversation that has absolutely mesmerized me in my youth, and it's something that I considered many times. I wonder what was going through Abraham's mind when he was sacrificing Isaac on that altar. And it's a conversation that we don't have to wonder about, and I'll show you that in a moment. But it's interesting that James, which is the very first book, again, we believe, of the New Testament, goes back to that point on faith, where Abraham places Isaac on the altar. And then he says, you see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And he was called God's friend. You see that a person is justified by what he does, not by faith alone. And that's the truth of the matter, right? And James is one about speaking truth. The truth is that faith will produce actions. And that's something that we have to recognize, and that we have to then observe how our actions represent the faith that we do have in Christ. And that's an important piece of the conversation that James has with us, because ultimately in Charles Swindoll's conversation and outline of James, his theme for the book of James, even though it's got the concept of the Proverbs and all that through it, these short truths that are spoken throughout James, he says, really, if you were to focus on a theme of James, the theme would be real faith produces authentic deeds. And that's an incredible statement. Real faith produces authentic deeds. And James is writing this, if you'll remember from last week, to the church who is scattered. The people that he's speaking to have been scattered by the Roman government. And at this point, aren't we in the same boat from a standpoint of not being able to come together because we've been scattered by this virus and by the actions of our government that says, shelter in place. This is a concern about spreading a virus to potential those who are most vulnerable to it. And so because of that, we've been in place now for a number of weeks, a couple of months at least. And you can see that James is writing this kind of instruction, this kind of faith producing actions conversation to folks who are in the same kind of boat that we are in. Theirs is probably a little more physical in their persecution, in that they were actually being harmed. Economically, they're persecuted, and in some ways that's similar to what's going on today. So you see that, and again he says in verse 24, you see that a person is justified by what he does and not by faith alone. In the same way, he says in verse 25, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. You see, Rahab had faith. Her faith was in the fact that the spies and the God that they were following and connected to was going to do something that would protect her, and not only her, but her family as well. And that faith proved out to be truth for her. And in fact, Rahab is in the lineage of Christ, and she's mentioned in that lineage of Christ. And that's an incredible blessing for her because of the faith she showed at Jericho when the spies came in to spy out the land. So I was telling you that we would also lock into a different passage that would also show the same kind of conversation about faith that James has here. And it's not hard to think what that passage would be. It's really going to be Hebrews chapter 11. So let's turn back one book to Hebrews chapter 11 and take a look at that. This is the faith chapter. Many of you might know it by that. And one of the things that I love, it's one of my favorite passages in the whole Bible. It starts off in chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And then God, or the writer of the book, and we don't know who the writer is specifically in Hebrews. Some thinks it may be Paul. There's others that have a different opinion. The writer is not fully necessary to understand, but what the author does is he goes into a by faith conversation, and he then starts to point out how faith produced actions in many of the people who he discusses here in the Old Testament. In fact, as he goes through this by faith conversation, he uses that phrase, by faith, 15 times in this one chapter. And it's an incredible conversation. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. So again, how do we know God created the earth? It's by faith. By faith we know that. By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. And it continues. By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. All these people were still living by faith when they died. And then it goes into chapter 17, or verse 17 of chapter 11. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. And again, I mentioned a little earlier that that's one of the things that I kind of thought through is in my youth. The idea of what could have been going through Abraham's mind at that point of sacrifice. Possibly he was thinking, God is going to keep me from following through on this. He's going to tell me not to do this. Or possibly he could have been thinking that in some way God was going to stop this from occurring, and that maybe he didn't have to go through with this. But in actuality, Hebrews gives us an incredible insight to Abraham's faith, because that's not what Abraham was thinking at all. And if you'll read with me in chapter 7, it says, it is through Isaac that you're, and again, this is, let's go back to chapter 7, verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned, this is verse 19, that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. You see, Abraham was set to go through with that sacrifice. He wasn't hoping that God was going to stop him. He wasn't thinking that in some way God would provide another path forward. When God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, in Abraham's mind, it was done. And that is an incredible amount of faith. And what he was thinking was that God could raise Isaac from the dead, because it was through Isaac that God said, I'm going to raise this great nation. And so that's how much faith Abraham had. was that he had in his mind sacrificed Isaac. Now we know that God stayed his hand and said, don't do this, and then provided a ram to follow. But the amazing concept for me about faith in that whole conversation is that in Abraham's mind, it was done. When God said, I want your son, Abraham said, you have him. That is just an incredible amount of faith. And figuratively speaking, he received him back from the dead because in his mind's eye, he was already dead. Just an incredible statement. By faith now in verse 20, Isaac blessed Jacob. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born. By faith, when he had grown up, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as a son of Pharaoh's daughter. I mean, again, just incredible statements of faith. And when you start to wonder, how in the world am I supposed to represent my faith? You get a very nice picture of how these great, wonderful, historic figures of the Bible and huge heroes of faith for us represented their faith when they needed to. Love this in verse 29. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea. You don't think that took faith? You don't think that took action to get your foot set on dry land in the middle of two walls of water that are standing on either side of you? By faith, the walls of Jericho fell. What took Jericho down? Faith. Amazing, incredible statement. And in verse 31, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Again, James does an incredible job as the first book, we think, in the New Testament of tying his conversation about faith and how to live in a scattered world back to what Hebrews now ties in to this whole conversation about faith, and it dovetails beautifully. And the characters that James speaks to represent incredible faith are re-represented in Hebrews chapter 11. And then again, it goes on to say, what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned into strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Incredible statements. And James starts us off in the New Testament with a focus in chapter 2 on what good is it. Hopefully you've found out something today that helps you recognize what good is it. It's wonderful because your faith can produce actions. And when your actions are representative of your faith, you make an incredible statement for God in this community and to those around you. And I know that we're socially distanced right now. I know that it's a challenge to not be able to come together, but what a blessing it was to see so many over at the building the other night, blessing those seniors that were graduating, being able to connect with Daniel and Megan, our new ministry staff that's coming in to work with us soon. Just incredible amounts of faith that people are showing right now. And hopefully this will be something that you could take with you and will help provide you sustenance and help mature you and help grow you through this period of time that we're scattered. So my prayer is that you're blessed from today's effort. Have a great day. Take care.